Hello there, I'm so glad you're here. This is Jenna from McGuire, and today I'm sharing with you a few new ways to use vellum on your cards. Now, vellum I often forget about, so every once in a while I like to break it out and find new ways to use it. One of the great things about vellum is that it's somewhat see-through, so you can create see-through cards, shaker cards, see-through windows, lots of different elements, and today we're going to really stretch that. Now, these techniques can be done with a variety of products. I'm using some new really fun ones from Pinkfresh Studio, but try what you have at home. If you do shopping for Pinkfresh at the time this video goes up, they have a really great free gift offer, and I will have that in the description below, so be sure to check that out. Let's get started with our first card that has a vellum wrap around the front. I'm using the Pinkfresh Beautiful Branch collection here. Now there is a stamp set, a coordinating die, coordinating stencils, and a coordinating press plate. So these are sold separately so you can mix and match whatever you would like. I'm actually going to use all 4 of them for my card. Now the nice thing about the die set is it even cuts out the sentiments very close up to the stamped image. Now the press plate can be used in many ways. I will be using it to foil. However, at the end of this video, I will demonstrate other ways you can use press plates. So stay tuned for that. Many ways you can use them. In the past, people used foil plates to foil. You still can, but press plates can also be used to foil and do much more. So I have this Spellbinders Glimmer machine here. This allows me to foil with either a hot foil plate or a press plate, as I've mentioned. I'm using the Spellbinders Aura Gold Glimmer Foil. I really like this one. It's foolproof foiling. I will take my press plate and put it on the warmed up portion of my glimmer machine. I'll put the foil face down onto it and then a piece of white cardstock on top of that. Then I'll put the 2 plates that come with the glimmer machine on top and I press the timer button. Now once that timer button runs through, I'll take all of those plates, the platform and plates, out of the glimmer machine and run it through my Spellbinders Platinum die cut machine. The glimmer machine provides the heat, the die cut machine provides the pressure. If you've watched my videos in the past, you know that I love using foil plates, but I even more like to foil with my press plates because I find it gives even better results. So I'm seeing a lot of companies not doing hot foil plates anymore, but instead just doing press plates because they can be used for foiling and many other things, which again, I'll demonstrate later on. Now for this particular card, I need 2 of these images, so I'm doing that foiling process again, and then I will use the coordinating die that I showed you earlier to cut both of them out. Now remember, if you don't have a foil machine or a better press system, you could also use the coordinating stamp set and then the coordinating die and get a very similar look. Now it's time to add color to these. There is that coordinating stencil set that I showed you. There are 2 stencils in this. One does the flowers and one does the leaves. It would be fun to do kind of like a rainbow of flowers across this with like a rainbow blend, but I'm going for pink and peach flowers. So I'm using Pinkfresh dye inks. I've got the color there on the screen, and I'm putting this sparkly rose down kind of heavier towards the center and lighter towards the tip of the flowers, but I'm not taking a whole lot of time to blend it. This is something that can be done very quickly. I've placed my die cut and stencil onto my Altenew Ultra Sticky Mat, which holds them in place as I do my inking. Once I've put pink over this die cut, I will move on to the other die cut and do the exact same thing. So the process you see me do here, I will do 2 times, so they're exactly the same, but you could change up the colors if you wanted to. Now you could leave this as is, but I think it's fun to come in with a second color over the same stencil, so you kind of have a 2-tone blend. So I'm coming in with a coral color. This is passion fruit, and I'm using a micro brush so that this color only gets towards the center of the flowers. So we have that coral at the center, then the pink, and then it kind of fades to white at the tips, which really brings these flowers to life. See the one on the left, I haven't added the passion fruit to yet, and it makes a big difference. So I'll add the passion fruit to the one on the left also, and now it's time for the second stencil, which does the leaves. I'm again going to use 2 colors to really bring these leaves to life. I first put down the key lime color, trying to go a little bit heavier towards the base of the leaves. And then I will come in with a tiny brush and add waterfall to the base of the leaves also, which is a nice blue color. which will give us just a little bit of a blue tint to those leaves. So again, adding two different colors over one stencil is really a great way to add a lot of interest to your images. And I really like that the outline of this is foiling, but if you use a stamp set, you could also just gold heat emboss and get a somewhat similar look, just a little bit less shine. Now it's time to do the inside of our card. I've got the front elements created. Let's do the inside of our card. When you open up this vellum card, the flaps of this vellum card, you can see there is this colorful background inside. I created this with a new layering stencil set from Pinkfresh called Modern Rug Stencils. These are really cool. There's like 5 or 6 stencils, and when you use them together, you get like that color block background that you see on the example here. So you can do this with a variety of colors, and they're designed so that the little areas of color match up perfectly. So I'm going to create a background on white cardstock using the same ink color families that I used on the front of my card, so it'll match nicely. I did want to mention they also have a new border stencil set. These would be fun to layer on top of the layering stencil set I just showed you. I decided not to use these, but wanted to mention because if you're ever looking to add a little stencil detail to something, this is a great option. All right, so let's go back to the Modern Rug layering stencils. I'm going to use, again, the colors that I used on the front, lighter and darker shades from the same color families. Pinkfresh inks are available in light, medium, dark, and extra dark, so it's easy to find which ones go together. But you could always use less colors of ink and just apply light-handed over one stencil and heavier-handed over the next stencil. Now I'm using the Spellbinder's large blending brushes here. These are super fluffy and soft, and I find they're great for covering large areas like this pretty quickly and gives smooth results without harsh edges. So I did the first stencil with Coral Reef, and now I'm coming in with the next stencil, and you can see how they meet up nicely. Now these stencils do have little tick marks in the corner so that you can line up those corners with the corners of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch cardstock piece, which I have under the stencil here. Now you could also just tape the stencils up into the top left of a bigger cardstock piece each time, and that would also help you to arrange them, but they're very easy to line up. So I'm doing some lighter colors and some darker colors. I really wanted bold color on this. The reason I wanted bold color on this is the vellum will cover it up when the card is closed and really soften it. So I wanted it to be bold enough that you could see it through that vellum. And then when you open up the vellum sides or flaps of the card, you see all this bold color, and it just makes a big impact. So after I've used all of the stencils, we have this solid background of beautiful colors. You could do these in any colors you want. These inks will dry and smooth out, given a little bit of time, and it'll give great results. Now I do want this to be a bit smaller than 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, so I'm cutting about 1/4 of an inch off each side. I'm putting glue on the back of that and gluing it to the top of a note card. And I'm putting it right up in the top corner against the folded edge. And I'll trim the excess off. So what I have is a little bit of a mini note card here. It's about, 3 3/4 inches by about 5 inches. This will go inside of our vellum card. All right, next up, I need a piece that will be on the back of our vellum card. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that now. I'm just holding my little card up against the bottom corner of a white piece of cardstock so that I can easily cut it to the same size. Sometimes this is easier than measuring it or making pencil marks. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside. Let's create our vellum card. Now this vellum will have 2 flaps that kind of wrap around the front of that colorful card that we've created. So I'm starting out with a piece of vellum that's 8.5 by 11, and I'm cutting it in half. So I have 2 pieces that are 5.5 by 8.5 inches. So you need 2 pieces of vellum at that size. I will then cut off 2 1/8 of an inch from both of these. So I'm holding them both together. It's easy to cut them both at the same time. And I'm cutting off 2 1/8 of an inch. Now, if you have trouble finding 2 1/8 of an inch, if you find the 2 inch mark and the 2 1/4 inch mark, it's halfway between. So I cut that amount off, and now we need to do a score line on each. On both of these, I will do a score line at 4 1/4 inches. Once I have a score line on both of these pieces, I will fold at these score lines and use my bone folder to reinforce it. Now I am using some Simon Says Stamp vellum here. It's a nice heavyweight vellum. I do recommend having a heavyweight vellum for techniques like this, but try whatever vellum you may have. Chances are it'll work well. All right, so these two pieces will fit together so that the flaps meet up in the middle, but we need to glue them together. To glue them together, I'm using Altenew double-sided adhesive sheets, and I'm cutting a piece that is slightly smaller than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I'll remove one side of the release paper and put it on the back large flap of one of these vellum pieces. I like to use the corner of my scoreboard or MISTI to line that up, since this adhesive sheet is pretty much the same size as the vellum that we're putting it on. Okay, so I have that adhesive on the back of this piece. I'll press it down with my bone folder. Now I'll remove the release paper. And the edge of the big flap on this piece, I will tuck into the fold on the other. So you can see I'm pressing in there, and then I'll press it down. And so that adheres those two large flaps together, and the little flaps will meet in the middle. And this will be kind of a vellum wrap that will be around our card. Now let's add our flower elements to this vellum wrap. Now these floral elements are going to be sticking off the edge of our vellum wrap, so I want to double them up so they're strong and sturdy. So I die cut 2 additional flower die cuts from white cardstock, and I'm gluing those to the back of our flower elements. Now they're a bit thicker and stronger. I will use adhesive to add one of these to the left flap and one of these to the right flap. So when you put glue on these, you want to make sure you're only putting glue on half of it. Let's adhere the bottom floral piece first. This will be glued to the right flap. So I'm only putting adhesive on the back right of that floral image. I'm using Gina K tape runner here. You could use whatever tape you want. I just thought this would be good because if I need to move it, I can, but it'll dry strong. So I'm going to place that down onto the front of our vellum card. And again, it's only getting adhered to that right flap. Now we'll do the same thing with the top flower, but this time we're putting it on the back left of it because it's going to get glued to the left flap. So when you open up the flaps of this vellum, one floral image goes to the left and one goes to the right, making it a really unique design and something very different than store-bought. Now here I'm kind of playing around with where I want the positioning to be. I did change my mind a little bit on it, so it's nice that I have adhesive that I can move. And then once I'm happy with it, I can really press it down and that will hold tight. Or you could always squeeze in a little bit of super strong liquid adhesive if you really want to be sure. But there is another way I'm going to make sure these stay put, and that is by putting a die cut on the inside of these flaps. So I cut 2 additional white die cuts, and I'm holding one to the back of this top floral piece. I'll put little pencil tick marks on this die cut right where that fold line is. So you'll see I put a pencil mark there and there. Then I can use my scissors to connect those pencil marks and cut that off. Now I'll put some strong liquid adhesive all over the back of this flower die cut. And some of this will be on the vellum, of course, too. So what's happening is I am sandwiching that vellum flap between these die cuts that I'm putting together. And it'll just make it more secure, and it'll also keep you from seeing any of the adhesive through that vellum. So now we have this one glued up here on the top, and I will do the same thing with the bottom. There are a few other ways you could have put this card together, but this is the one that I found really gave the best results. And when you put these extra layers onto a vellum card, it gives it more support and it makes it stronger. So this card will actually stand up nicely on its own thanks to the layers we're putting on it. All right, so now we have our vellum card flaps ready to go. It's time to add that little mini note card to the inside. I put a piece of double-sided adhesive sheet on the back of that mini note card, and then I place this inside of our vellum card. So I just centered it up in there, and you can see how it fits in there nicely. And our vellum flaps wrap around it nicely, and you can see that bold color through the vellum. I also thought I'd do some stamping on that bold mini note card on the inside. So I have my MISTI stamping tool with my waffle flower grip mat in the inside, which helps me to hold things in place. I'll also use my magnet because I really don't want this to move at this point because everything's assembled. I don't want to mess up my stamping. So first I'm going to close the left flap so that just that one flower is up there. I'll take the flower stamp. Remember that stamp coordinates with the press plate that I used to foil. I'll take the stamp and line it up with that foiled image. Once I have it lined up, I will close the door on my stamping tool to grab that stamp. I will then open up my vellum flap and stamp that flower onto that colorful mini note card. I did put some Post-it notes in there to mask off to the left and the right of that mini note card. I didn't want to accidentally stamp on the rest of the vellum, so I put some Post-it notes in there. I first stamped this with bubblegum ink, and I decided that was too light. I really wanted to go bold on the inside. So I ended up switching to Raspberry Bliss, which is much darker, and I've stamped that towards the top of this mini note card. And because I lined up my stamp with my foil image, when the vellum flaps are closed, you won't see the stamping on the inside, but once you open it up, you'll see it. So now I'll repeat the same process to stamp a floral image on the bottom. Now, looking at this, I think it'd be really fun to use those stencils that did that kind of fun color blocking and then do like a background stamp on over it, or maybe some foiling over it. Here you can see how some tone-on-tone darker stamping is just gorgeous. All right, so after I've done that, you can see how those floral images on the inside are hidden by the flowers on the outside when the card is closed. Now this isn't necessary, but I thought it'd be fun to have a gold cording that's tied around the card so that the recipient has to untie it in order to open it. So I found this gold cording in my stash. Any kind of gold thread would work. And I have a long piece here, longer than I need, but it makes it easier. I will tape the center of that piece onto the back center of our vellum. Now I'm just using some temporary pieces of tape here. Nobody's going to see those, but it helps to hold that cording in place as we add a backing to our vellum card. So I have another piece of double-sided adhesive sheet. I find these super handy, especially when working with vellum. I'm putting that onto a piece of white cardstock that is cut to the same size as that mini note card that we have inside of our vellum card. I think that's about 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I will now place this on top of the cording, lining it up with that mini note card that's in the inside. So you're looking at the back of the card right now. So now this gold cording will stay attached to the card, and all I have to do is tie it into a bow when I'm ready to give it to the recipient. For a greeting on the inside, I almost use this Grateful for You because it's from that same stamp set, and I love that the die cuts it out so close. But I decided to instead stamp a different greeting directly to the center of our floral stamped piece on the inside. And I chose to stamp it with the same color as those flowers, so it didn't stand out too much, but you definitely could stamp it with black ink if you prefer. And it was at this point that I realized I did that upside down. Now, I gotta tell you, I make upside down cards all the time, at least once a week, at least. And I know many of you said that you do the same. I do usually edit this stuff out of my videos just to save you some time, but do know that it happens. I have to perform card surgery often. I wasn't giving up on this card, so I'm just cutting the flap off of that little mini note card on the inside. I'll glue it to a new mini note card, and then I'll glue that to the inside. So I will always perform whatever surgery is necessary to save a card from being, unusable. Like I will always try to save it. And, usually there's a way. If there's a will, there's a way. So there you see me creating a new mini note card to go on the inside, saving that front panel. I'll just glue it right there and no one will ever know. And now it opens up correctly. All right, so let's look at how I tie this. The first time I tie it, I like to tie it kind of tight. You could just tie it on your own, just doing like a bow, like you're tying on your shoes. But if you want it to be tighter, what you can do is use reverse tweezers to pinch the knot as you tie the bow. I don't find this necessary, but if you struggle with tying a bow on string like this, try using reverse tweezers to hold things. Once you get the bow tied, you can pull the tweezers out and tighten. And then you can trim off any of the excess. So let's look at this completed card. It's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. You have the see-through vellum along the top, sides, and bottom. And you can see through to that colorful inside, but it's muted. If I would have put these flowers against that bold background, it might have been overwhelming, and that vellum gives that softness. But when you open it up, pow, you've got all that fun color. So this is a good reminder to use vellum to create a wrap for your card. I actually got a graduation card that had a vellum wrap on it, and that's what inspired me to do this today. So vellum is great for creating a belly band or a wrap around your card, or even just to soften a bold background. So keep that in mind next time you're creating a card. Think about how you can incorporate some vellum. All right, let's go ahead and do another card. And this card actually has multiple ways of using vellum. I put them all on one card, but there are different ideas here that you can use in different ways. And then at the end, again, I'll show you some more ways to use those press plates. But first, let's create that fruity drink on the front. I'm using the new Pinkfresh Cheers collection. There's a stamp set, a coordinating stencil set to color it, a coordinating die set, which also cuts out the sentiments, and the coordinating press plate that again can be used with a better press or to foil or to make an impression. I'll demonstrate that later. I chose to do stamping with this stamp set. So I am stamping the drink image along with all the little fruit pieces. That's actually one big stamp. So you stamp the one big image, then you use the stencils to color in all of those images, and then use the die, actually it's one die, to cut all of these images out at once, which is a big time saver, and I love that Pinkfresh does this. I'm also stamping cheers, so I can add that to my card later. I did stamp 2 of these so that I could create some extra pieces. I actually used 2 of the leaf images, so I'm glad I did so. Now, I'm not going to show you all of the coloring with the stencils because it's really straightforward. I just followed the stencils. The stencils actually have an engraving on it that number them. So I just followed the numbering and I just used whatever colors of ink I wanted. And in fact, I used mostly the colors I used on the last card because I still had them out. Now you could get really creative with this. You could add maybe some glitter paste to it to add some sparkle to your fruity drink. Lots of things you can do, but I just did some basic coloring with Pinkfresh dye inks. I will say there is a stencil that colors in the ice cubes, and I did use a little bit of white pigment ink over the stencil so that the ice cubes appear a little bit softer. Okay, so once I had all of my coloring done, again, it was really easy to do. I'm using that die that coordinates to cut out all of those fruity images at once. And I'm also using the coordinating die for the cheers. So I can cut this out and I'll have all of the elements to add to the front of our card ready to go. All right, now let's do some foiling on vellum. You see that subtle foil detail on the vellum note card and on the front of that shaker window? That was done by foiling with a press plate. So this is the new Pinkfresh Twist Pattern press plate, and you can see there's a coordinating die, which makes it really cool to cut out. Now I'm going to foil with this press plate onto vellum, but later in this video, again, I will show you how to use it with the better press system and also how to make an impression with the regular die cut machine. So let's do foiling. I have a piece of vellum here that I've cut to be 11 inches long by 4¼ inches wide. I'm placing the press plate towards one end so it lines up along the bottom, and I'm creating little hinges using some temporary tape. This is Spellbinder's yellow tape. Any kind of temporary tape or washi tape would work. This hinge will allow me to flip up the press plate, but keeping it in the right position, and slide in a piece of the foil. So I slide that aura foil in so the pretty side of the foil touches the pretty side of the press plate. Then I'll flip this all over and put it onto the warmed up glimmer machine. Once the timer runs, I'll take that platform and plates out and run it through my die cut machine. This is the same process that I did on my last card. However, this time we're doing the foiling on vellum instead of on cardstock. Now, I find this foils beautifully. You may want to let the plates sit on the glimmer a little bit extra time, maybe 30 extra seconds, but I didn't think I needed to, and it worked out great. You get this really fine foil detail. It's kind of hard to see the shine in the video, but it's gorgeous. Keep in mind, this particular press plate has very thin lines, so you get a very thin foil result, and it's gorgeous. I will then do a score line at 5½ inches, which will result in a 4¼ by 5½ inch top folded vellum note card that has foiling on the front of it. Now these details are kind of hard to see in the video, but in real life, they are beautiful. So next time you want to do some foiling, try doing so on vellum. Okay, so now we have a see-through card base with some foiling. Let's add a shaker to the front of this. I actually wanted to create a shaker window where that foiling pattern extends. So let me show you what I did. I'm using one of my new favorite products. This is the Decorative Frame press plate and coordinating dies from Pinkfresh. So that press plate creates this series of pressed frames. So very detailed. I mean, it's got a ton of detail to it. I'm going to foil with it, but later in this video, I will show other ways to use it. Then the die will cut out all of those frames. So you have a bunch of individual ones. So you can either use this as a background or cut it up into a bunch of individual frames. I decided to use these frames to create shaker walls. So the walls for a shaker window in the front of our card. So I cut that frame die several times from white cardstock. I believe I cut it 6 times. And I chose this medium frame size for my shaker walls. All of the leftover frames that I cut, I'm saving in a drawer so I can use them on other cards. A bunch of leftover frames from this. So I'm gluing 6 of these white die cut frames together to make nice thick shaker walls. You could instead cut 1 and use thin foam tape around the back, but I like how layering up those die cuts gives us a strong base for our shaker, nice walls for our shaker. And I also end up with all of those leftover frames for another card. Okay, so I've glued all of those together. Now I want to cut a window in the front of our foiled vellum card. And I chose a rectangle die that's about the same size as that frame we just created. Now bear with me here. You'll see why I'm doing this in a moment. I'm cutting this rectangle from the front of our vellum card. You don't have to do this. You could leave this solid. But I wanted to cut out that center area of this foiled vellum so that that center piece there that we're going to cut out will actually become the front of our shaker window. So instead of using acetate for our shaker window, we're going to use a piece of foiled vellum. And instead of just going through and foiling another piece of vellum, I thought I would cut right from the center. So now I have this vellum rectangle that I'll set aside for when we put our shaker together. And here we have our shaker walls, and you can see how that all lines up very nicely. Now I need to create a new back for our shaker window here because I just cut the center of that vellum out. And I thought I'd use that bold, colorful layering stencil set that I used earlier in the video. Now I went ahead and created a background just like I did earlier in the video, but this time I added in some sweet mustard yellow color and some apricot orange color. And then after building that whole background, I decided to use the stencils as they weren't intended to be used. I kind of turned them on their side so that I could start overlapping some of these color block images. So you can see here I turned this one sideways and I added some more pink. I'll take another one and turn it sideways and add some yellow and some orange. So instead of having just a background where all the colors meet up with each other, I'm overlapping them. So it's just another way to use this layering stencil set. And I really like this one. They came out with one that had kind of triangle areas that overlapped last month, and I used it in a video. I'll link to that up here on the top right. I really like these that allow you to create colorful backgrounds that are almost like pattern paper, but you can customize them to match the rest of your card. Okay, so now let's take our shaker walls. Remember, these are the stacked up frame die cuts. I'll put glue along the back of this and I'll place it onto my colorful background. I kind of moved the frame around and picked the area that I liked the best to show through. I wanted something that was really bold and bright because remember, there'll be vellum over this, and so that will really soften it. I then use my scissors to kind of tuck behind the frame edge and trim off the excess. I could have cut this down before gluing it onto the frame, but this is what made sense to me at the time. So now we have the thick shaker walls with a back to our shaker window. Okay, next I cut a piece of white cardstock to be a bit bigger than that shaker window. Onto this white cardstock piece, I'm placing some double-sided adhesive sheet. I have this scrap of the adhesive sheet left over, so I put my cardstock into the top corner, and I'll use my scissors just to cut off the excess. So now we have a white cardstock piece covered with the adhesive. Now bear with me as I start to put these pieces together. It'll make sense here in a moment. I'm using my sticky mat just to kind of hold these elements in place as I assemble. So I have that white cardstock piece with the adhesive facing up towards the camera. I'll lay my open card down onto it so that opening goes right there at the center of that exposed adhesive. Sorry, my head gets in the way. It's the best way to center it up, but you'll see how it's laying right onto that double-sided adhesive that is exposed. And then that opening, that rectangle opening, is still exposed adhesive, right? I'm going to take my shaker window and place it on top. So we're kind of putting our card back together. And remember, I still have that piece of foiled vellum, that rectangle piece, that I can add to the top of my shaker window. All right, before we put the shaker window together, we need to put together the added elements that go inside of the card. So I've got my card opened up here. You're looking at the inside. I need to create 3 more pieces that are of the same size. Instead of measuring, I just hold it up to the piece and I put a little pencil mark where I need to cut with my trimmer. And so I've made those little pencil marks. I'll take my trimmer and I'll cut 3 pieces to that. So these 3 pieces will be the same size as that white that we just added to our card. Now these 3 pieces just add support to our card. First of all, you see that white piece on my card? There's some yellow ink that I got on it. And I wanted to hide that. So one of the pieces will get glued there to hide that yellow ink. So I'll glue that one right on top of the other. This one's not really necessary. Again, it's to hide my ink. Then I will take another piece of the white cardstock. I'll put glue on it, then line it up with the rectangle that's glued into our card. But the adhesive will be facing up towards the camera. So I put glue on it, I'm lining it up, adhesive is facing the camera, I'll close my card onto it, and then we'll add the third and final piece to the back of the card. So all of these line up, which means we have a see-through card around the edges, but we have a place to write our personal message on the inside and a place to stamp something on the back of the card if we want to. And this is strong enough to stand up nicely on display. All right, back to our shaker window. I need one decorative frame to go on top of the window to give it a finished look when we put it together. So I'm using that decorative frame's press plate, and we're going to foil with it like I've done many times in this video. I'll lay the press plate down, add a piece of foil onto it. You want the pretty side of the foil to touch the pretty side of your press plate. Then you put the white cardstock on top of that, put the plates on top, press the timer button. When the timer button runs through, you take all of those plates out and run it through your die cut machine to apply the pressure. Now remember I said this press plate has a lot of detail to it. Check this out. Look at the fine detail, like really delicate foiling that we got with this press plate. I've never seen foiling or stamping as detailed. This is the advantage of press plates, that detail that you get, and it foils beautifully. Now remember, we have leftover piece of foil. I don't want that to go to waste. So I have a Pinkfresh solid hot foil plate here. You can see I put it on my glimmer machine. I'll take my leftover foil, put it face down onto that solid plate, put cardstock on top of that, then the 2 plates on top of that, and I run through the timer. After the timer's done, I do leave it for another minute or so. Whenever I use that solid plate, I like to give it a little extra time. So while that's running, I'll use the coordinating decorative frames die to cut out our first foiled one, and look at the fun frame you get with foiling detail. And remember, this creates a bunch of frames. So I got lots of these with those foiled details ready to go for many cards. Now I was originally going to use this one and glue it on the top of our shaker window, but I thought maybe I'll use that leftover foil where we're getting the reverse foiling using the solid hot foil plate. So let's go back to that. That had a couple minutes time there. I took all the platforms out, running it through my die cut machine to give that pressure. And now we have used our leftover foil, and look at how beautiful the results of this is. You just peel that off. That leftover foil is not going to waste. You get the reverse foiling, beautiful detail, flawless results. So now I'll use the coordinating die to cut this out. This will give me a bunch of frames that are gold with white detail, whereas the first ones we did were white with gold detail. So it's a reverse. So a great way to use up your leftover foil is with that solid hot foil plate. Okay, so once I've cut these out, I did decide to go with the reverse and use that frame that has more gold with the white details. I just thought it stood out a bit more on my card. But here's a closer look at the detail. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? All of these leftover frames for another card. Okay, so I've got this frame ready to go, and this will go on the front of our shaker window. So now we can put our shaker together and we'll have a vellum shaker window. All right, so I filled up my shaker with some gold confetti. These are flat and they'll really show through that vellum. And then also some little clear gemstones. These won't show through as much, but they help everything to move nicely. So I kind of flattened all those out, and now I'll put liquid adhesive around the top of the frame. You really want to make sure you go all the way around so that nothing slips out of your shaker window. I will then lay that vellum piece that we cut out of our note card, remember that has the foiling, I'll lay that on top of our shaker well. This will give us kind of a muted shaker look. If you wanted to, you could use acetate and it would show through clearly, but there's something really nice about a vellum shaker window because it's really subtle. The focus will still be on what's on top of the shaker window, and it just gives that little sense of movement inside. Then on top of that, I'm gluing on our foiled frame. All right, so I'll give that a few minutes to dry, and then I'm adding my little fruity images that we created earlier. I glued those directly onto the shaker window. Using liquid adhesive, I arranged all of those there, and I added the cheers also. So let's look at our completed card. You can see it is see-through around the edges, but it has that fun foil detail. There's a place to write your message on the inside. I might add that extra cherry and a stamped sentiment, but I'm not sure quite yet. Now this does stand up nicely on its own. And here you can see the movement inside of that subtle shaker window. By using vellum on the front of your shaker, it kind of mutes it down so you see the movement, but it's not too distracting. It's just a nice option for a shaker window. You can also see the vellum that has the foiling and that foiled frame that we created. So lots of different elements going on here, but what really makes it special is the use of the vellum for the card base so that it's see-through, and the use of the vellum on the shaker window so it's muted, and of course the foiling that we did on the vellum. All right, now before we go, I did want to show you other ways you could use those press plates because they're amazing. I have done a very thorough video on different ways you can use press plates, and I will link to that at the end of this video and in my description below. First, let's use the Better Press system, which is what press plates were originally designed for. I'm placing my press plate onto the Better Press, and I'm inking it up with black ink. I'm finding you could really use any pigment or dye ink for this. I will then take a piece of cardstock and tape it onto the clear top plate of the Better Press. And I just like to use a little bit of temporary adhesive to do this so I can easily remove it when I'm done. I then pop the clear plate on top of the Better Press, and it pops in place with magnets, and it just kind of holds it above that inked up press plate. But then when you run it through your platinum die cut machine, it presses it down, transferring that ink, making a little bit of an impression and giving unbelievable detail. I have never been able to get such crisp, detailed results from a stamp. This definitely gives incredible results. And remember, there is a die that cuts this out, which makes a really cool background element. You could even make a see-through card base using this. So earlier we foiled with this. Now I've shown you how to use the Better Press system with it, but there is a third way you can use your press plates, and that is to make an impression using a die cut machine. Most die cut machines come with a flexible embossing mat. The one that I have here is gray. It's from the Spellbinders Platinum. You set up your die cut machine as you would to make an impression with a die, but instead of making an impression with a die, we're making an impression with the press plate. So sometimes they call this embossing with a die. Well, I'm embossing with a press plate. So I have that flexible mat, I put my cardstock down, the press plate on top of it. I'm following the sandwich that the manufacturer recommends. I run that through and look at the deep impression you get. Deeper than you normally would get from an embossing folder, and it's just another way to use a press plate. Remember, I did do a video on ways to use press plates. In fact, I show 5 ways in that video, so be sure to check that out. Now, I also wanted to demonstrate the same 2 methods for the decorative frames. First, let's do the impression with the die cut machine. So I have my embossing mat, I have a piece of cardstock, I'll put my press plate face down, And I'm following the sandwich that my die cut machine recommends in the instructions or in the manual for making an impression or embossing with a die. So I'll run that through, and this will give us a deep impression. If you want to, you could ink up your press plate before you lay it down on the cardstock, and that would leave color behind. Here I was just doing it uninked, so it just gives you this beautiful white impression. Now let's use that decorative frame die with the Better Press. So earlier in the video, I showed you how to foil with it. I just showed you how to make an impression with it. Now let's use it for what it was really intended for, with the Better Press. And this will blow your mind. So I have the decorative frame press plate on the Better Press. I have my cardstock on the top clear plate. I'll place the clear plate face down onto that. The 4 magnets will pop in place. We'll put it through our die cut machine, which presses it. And look at this. Look at the amazing detail that you get. I mean, I've never been able to get that with a stamp. It's just never been possible. So we get this amazing detail. This would be a wonderful background. You could do different colors. Remember, you can also foil with it, which we did earlier, or make an impression with your die cut machine. Just wanted to remind you that there are many ways to use press plates because, you know, as a new product comes out, you want to know the different ways to use it so you can get your value from it. All right, so there you have it. Several ways to use your vellum creatively and ways to use those press plates. I will link here at the end to a couple other related videos, including that one with 5 ways to use press plates. I do have all of my supplies linked below in my YouTube description, including that way to get a free gift at the time this video goes up. I thank you for spending this time with me. I will see you again soon in another video. Take care.